Hello, students. In Lesson 18, Velocity, which is in code.org's Computer Science Discoveries, this is Unit 3. So this is the very beginning of the second chapter of this unit. And in this unit, we will learn how to apply some of the stuff we've already learned, um, complex patterns and stuff like this, into some other codes that will make things work a little smoother and some shortcuts, if you want to call it that way. Velocity is one of these shortcuts that we will be learning. So we learned about in chapter 1 and last semester the counter pattern, which is a really important pattern in code.org. So the counter pattern being like what you see in this example up here, sprite1.x equals sprite1.x plus 1. And that is basically telling the program that you want to move the sprite by 1 pixel with each frame of the draw loop, each tick of the draw loop. So this is used so much, and you know in your video games you've got things moving all the time. So sprites have this velocity x property that is basically another way to write that counter pattern there. So in an easier way, it lets you know more about what is actually happening. So an easier way to recognize it, I think. So we know that velocity, by the way, is speed in a certain direction. So in code.org, we're talking speed using our x values, which are left and right. To move from left to right, that's positive, and from right to left is negative. And we will also learn about the velocity y, which we know goes up and down. So there is a video in Bubble 2 that we will skip, but I want you to make sure that you watch that video. Either you can pause my video and go into code.org and watch it when you get to Bubble 2, or make sure you watch it before you get ready to do your own work if you're just watching this video. So here's what it says. We want to make sure that we are following the instructions. Drag a sprite.velocityx block directly below where your sprite is created. And our sprite is created up here in lines 1 and 2. Notice that our sprite is called fish. So we need to change the name to fish. And we want to give it a value of 1 and then run the code. We are going to see what happens. I see our friend the fish is back. I also see a bunch of ellipses and some big ellipses down here, down being the sand. So the velocity x property is there is no draw loop. There is no counter pattern inside the draw loop. Instead, we have the velocity x as part of setting up the sprite. All right. And if we give it a different value, let's make it 10. I hope that you're expecting for that to change the speed, because there we see it. Now it's zooming across the screen rather than going slowly. All right. Bubble 3, we're asked to look at this feather, and the feather's at the top of the screen, and we want the feather to move down to the bottom of the screen, like to float down. And if the velocity x took us side to side like the fish, then we know velocity y will move us up and down. So that is what we want to do. Again, we want to put it below where we are creating the sprite in this case. And we want to name it feather. And I'll use a speed of 1 pixel per run of the draw loop. Reset, run, and there you see it. If the feather's not moving fast enough for you, what would you do? Yeah, you would just increase the number. All right, we can finish it. We're going to move to 4. Not too hard. We only had to add 1 line of code there. In Bubble 4, we are going to be rotating the sun. We're going to use, so x side to side, Y up and down. Rotation speed is where we're turning. So these all involve movement, but different directions. Right now the sun does not move. We want to use the rotation block. And for now, we want to do it before the draw loop, after we create the sprite. So if we want it to rotate by 2 degrees, it would look like this. They want us to rotate it by 3 degrees. So we're going to change the name to sun. We're going to rotate it by 3 degrees each time the draw loop is run. So, yay. Now that looks a lot more exciting. If this was part of our video game, it just looks a lot better than just sitting there, doesn't it? All right, bubble 5. So you've learned velocity x, side to side movement, velocity y, up and down, and rotation speed, which is like rotation when we're doing rotation plus 1, that counter block, or rotation plus 3. And again, we want to use, this time we're going to do it, but with a conditional. We're going to spin this little spinner, just like if we were making a game here. And we've already got an if statement added in here. And this time, instead of putting it the rotation speed up here where as soon as I click run, it starts spinning, this time we only want it to spin if we press the space bar down. So key went down, talking about the space. If the computer senses that the space key is pressed down, then we want the rotation to start happening. So we're going to change the name to wheel. And it doesn't give us a particular speed, so I'm just going to set it to maybe 10. All right. Notice that when I run it this time, just in the sun, when I clicked run, it automatically started rotating. This time it did not, because it's waiting for me to press the space bar. 1, 2, 3, go. There we go. And now I have a rotating color wheel. Yay. And you can play around with the speed on that a little bit, if you so desire, to see what different speeds do to the rotation. In this one, I'm not going to click run yet because I want you to think about what is happening. I see a fish again. I see that the fish is set up here to start moving across the screen to the right. And I see that, if the x value of the fish is less than 0, that means basically it goes off the screen over here. Then we want it to move at a positive x, which is to the right. And if it is negative, or if it's set to greater than 400, which we know is off the screen on this side, now we want it to go left, and we're making it -2. So this is what I wrote. I believe the fish will appear to swim back and forth across the screen. It will turn to the right if it is less than x equals 0 and go to the right. It will turn to the left if it is more than x equals 400. It will go back to the left, and it will do so indefinitely because it's in a draw loop. All right, let's see. And indeed, that is what it is doing. All right, hopefully that's what you predicted as well. And if not, take a moment to look at that code and compare it with what you're seeing on the screen so you can understand what those blocks of code, what those conditionals are making that fish do. All right, in this one, the ball bounces back when it hits the bottom of the screen, but we also want it to bounce back when it hits the top of the screen. And right now it goes to the top of the screen and it's gone forever. So we've got the ball dot y, using dot notation, that is greater than a y position of 380. Now, if you've forgotten, 380, our y position is the second one. That's down here at the bottom of the screen. So when the ball reaches here, it starts to go back. So 380 is 20 less than 400. So I'm going to keep that in mind because I'm going to drag another conditional below that one that says if the ball's y position is less than 20. This time specifically, if it gets to less than 20, so 10, 18, whatever it happens to go to, we want the ball velocity y to be the opposite of what it did before, because it was going up in that conditional. We want it to come down in this conditional. So we're going to have to rename it ball. And if we want it to go down the screen, remember that's a positive number. So it should do this indefinitely. I don't see any errors over here. Let's try it. And I did it at the same speed because it kind of makes sense. There we go. It worked. Now, in Bubble 8, we have two different practices. You've kind of learned all the skills. Now you get a chance to practice by controlling the speed and by controlling the direction and the up and down movement. In the first one here, we just want the flybot to fly up if the space bar is pressed. So it says to use an if statement. Remember, we find the if statements under control, and the if statements go in the draw loop. So we wanted to check if the space bar is pressed. That's that key went down code. Specifically, which key? The space key. And we want to use velocity y block to make the sprite move up when the user presses the space bar. Moving up the screen is a negative y value. We are getting close. We're going from 400 up to 0. So velocity y, I'm going to name it flybot. Right now, he's just sitting there. There's our flybot. We want him to move up, say negative 20. Let's make him move fast. All right, ready? Oh, wait. Why isn't he moving? That's right. I have to push the space bar down. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, go. Yeah. All right. Don't feel bad if you forgot that you have to push the space bar down, because I almost forgot that myself. All right, let's look at the other one, which is where we make a paintbrush dip down into the paint palette and go up. But remember, our computer does not recognize these in its brain as being a paintbrush and a paint palette. It just knows that they're sprites and it knows where they're located. It's given them a picture, but it doesn't care what these are pictures of. That's just set over here in the animation tab. We could change them to anything. All right, we want this paintbrush to move down and back up. So we've got two sprites. And it tells us, use a conditional to send the paintbrush down if the down arrow key is pressed. So if the down arrow key is pressed, notice it's if it's pressed, not if it's held down. If you only want it to move down when you're holding the button, then you just use key down. But if you want it as soon as you press the button for it to go, then you use key went down. All right. And we want it to move . down if the arrow key is pressed. So we're going to use our velocity Y, and we want this to be the brush, not the palette. And if we want it to go down, that's a positive value, so we'll just set it to 5. And we are going to use a different conditional to send the paintbrush up if it reaches the palette. So this one's a little bit trickier because computer doesn't know what the palette is. I can't say, hey, go to the palette and then move up. It only knows that the sprite is like this rectangle and it just happens to look like this picture. So we have to think about it. If this is where the brush is located, 220, 50, that's about where I'm at right there. It's the center of that sprite. So think about where the center is going to be when this is going to come down to where that paintbrush or paint is. So I'm going to have it maybe stop around maybe 310, 315. So if the sprite's Y, and we could come back over here to our Boolean and say if it's greater than our Boolean expressions over there. Remember those? I oftentimes just type that in, but so if the brush dot Y is greater than 310, we want the velocity to move in the other direction. So let's say -5. All right. Let's see if this works. So we want it to work if I press the down key. So I'm hitting my down arrow, 1, 2, 3. There we go. We're going down and back up. Perfect. Now, if you did 315, if you did 300, it's probably pretty close. All right, the assessment level is the last one that you're required to do, although I highly encourage you to work on the challenge levels if you have time, if you finished early. You can always come back to these challenge levels also. But that's where you learn some really cool stuff. In this particular one, what we see is the fish, and it says the code below should make the fish start moving right once you press the right arrow, and then it should continually swim back and forth. You should use conditional statements and the velocity block to make the fish swim. So, I'm not going to do this one for you, but they've gotten you started with a lot of things. They've already given you 3 conditionals, 3 if statements inside the draw loop. And they want you to do these 3 conditionals that are up here. So they want you to use a sprite.velocityX block inside each of these conditionals. And if you press the right arrow, the fish moves to the right. If you get to the right-hand side of the screen, move the fish to the left. And if you move to the left-hand side of the screen, move the fish to the right. The fish should always be facing the same direction that it is moving. So you will need to update the fish's animation to either fish L or fish R based on the direction it's facing. So this fish is currently set to fish R because that's how it was set up to be started at, okay? So if you want him facing the other way, that's fish L. If you want peek in the animation tab, you can see them, what they look like there. All right. Have fun with that. This is what I will grade you on. You can always look, I encourage you to look at the rubric. If you want to get full credit, I need to see the fish swim to the right side, turn and swim to the left side, and then repeat. And that the sprite should appear to face the appropriate direction. There should not be extra blocks, and you are not using the counter pattern, which you learned back in last semester. You're going to use instead the velocity the velocity blocks to control the movement. So keep that in mind. In fact, if you use the counter pattern, it's going to be probably no more than limited evidence, because that's what this lesson's about. All right, that being said, have a wonderful afternoon or morning or day, depending on what time this is when you're watching it, and I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Bye.